Right. Well, good afternoon. My name is Gus Carroll from Centrica, as Mike mentioned, and my role there is Group Head of Process Safety. And you may be curious as to why somebody who is primarily involved in oil and gas is talking at a conference about asset management in the electrical networks industry. Well, hopefully, as you'll see as I go through this presentation, which is really about managing creeping change, that the lessons we learnt from what I'm going to talk about are directly relatable and relevant to all asset management. It just happened to occur in the gas processing industry. Right. Right, fantastic. So I'm going to organise this presentation briefly into three sections, really. First of all, just to define what we mean by creeping change, and explain in a little bit of detail why we focused on this in particular, and then really focus mostly on what we've done about it and how we've tried to institutionalise our learning for the wider industry. Reiterating that the learnings are very applicable outside the oil and gas industry. So creeping change. Everybody in this room will be very familiar with engineering management of change, and it's a risky activity. We all understand that, and it's something which we all spend a great deal of time managing as best we can through a traditional engineering management of change process. So this diagram, it's very simplistic, but it purports to show that we are running an asset at a certain level of risk, and we want to change it. We want to make a modification, or we want to improve it, or we want to do something. And that change process, both during the change activity, the improvement activity, and then the reinstatement back into service, is generally of higher risk, because we have interruptions to the asset, we have people who are unfamiliar with the manufacturing asset in our case, on site, and so on and so forth. And then eventually we bring the asset back into service, reinstate it, commission it, and we hope we're at a better state than we were to start with. So that diagrammatically and very, very simplistically sort of explains what we mean by a typical engineering management of change process. Now contrast that with a creeping change process. So creeping change sneaks up on you. It's quite difficult to see and difficult to recognise. And it occurs where parameters such as flow or corrosion or particulate matter or any of many parameters changes very slowly over time, very incrementally over time. And this diagram shows that we start off with a particular parameter in some type of steady state condition, which is within tolerance levels. And slowly over time, which can be years, the parameter moves out of tolerance. And unless we've got very good monitoring and early warning intelligence systems in place, it's quite difficult to identify when we are breaching some initial level of tolerance, which is indicated through the amber line in this particular case. And often we only find the incident which has been caused by the creeping change when we get a near miss or an actual incident, be it safety or asset outage incident. And what we find is this type of situation of creeping change is particularly prevalent on aging assets. And I'm sure you operate many aging assets, we certainly do. So why did we focus on this? Well, in 2015, we had a very serious incident at our Barrow gas processing terminal up in the northwest of England, whereby we nearly killed 3 people. It was the most serious high potential near miss we've had in our history. we had 3 people who were standing essentially in a pool of petrol with hot surfaces above the auto-ignition temperature of that petrol, what we call condensate, but essentially liquid petroleum, a few feet away. And it's still a bit of a mystery why it didn't ignite, but it didn't, thank God. Had it ignited, it would have been catastrophic and we would have lost 3 people. The root cause analysis showed that creeping change was the fundamental root cause. And creeping change led to the failure of 6 key safety critical barriers. And specifically, the mechanisms for that creeping change were changes in fluid flow rates, so particulate matter, which previously was carried through the system, dropped out at dead legs and corners and in meter pockets, for example. Fluid densities changed. As the reservoir characteristics changed, the pressure reduced, we had greater fluid concentrations, and this changed the density of the fluid in the system. But we didn't recalibrate the instrumentation. And again, as the reservoir aged and we got to different parts of the reservoir, in this particular case, we had higher concentrations of carbon dioxide coming from the reservoir onshore, and this led to a higher acidic level of what we call carbonic corrosion within the pipework. And this led to certain deviations within the system. These changes had occurred over a number of years, but we hadn't identified them, even though during that period a number of engineering changes had been conducted on the asset. They had been conducted well and effectively and reinstated under an effective management of change process. But all the time, these creeping changes were going on. As a result of this incident and the root cause analysis, we recognized that there was a strong case of we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't recognize that we were operating under unsafe conditions. And interestingly, at around the same time, the Health and Safety Executive Offshore Safety Directorate had concluded a program that they call KP4. So this is key program, and this was obviously the 4th key program, which was on asset integrity on aging assets, offshore assets. And they too had concluded that creeping change was one of their major concerns as a result of their offshore audits. And that many operators had failed to understand its significance. So what did we do about this? Well, we recognized that we needed to do something to better characterize creeping change within our organization. And we also know that we didn't have the capabilities within our own company to do this. If we had done, we would have done it. And so we partnered with the Health and Safety Laboratory, which is, as you'll know, is the technical branch of the Health and Safety Executive, located in Buxton. And we also partnered with the Energy Institute. The Energy Institute provided funding, but they also provided expert peer review, and they provided a means of publishing the findings from the work that we conducted widely to the industry. And our involvement in this was providing access to the research team from HSL to 3 assets in order to get some field work and provide the means for testing the methodology that HSL were developing. And the assets were an offshore gas platform in the southern North Sea, an onshore gas processing terminal, and a gas-fired power station. And this work was conducted over about the course of a year or so with various field work and technical input. We identified a range of different types of creeping change. And this is where I think the learning from the oil and gas industry starts to widen out into generalized learning. So the first type of creeping change we characterized as aging or degradation or obsolescence. So as the name suggests, this is where assets age, they get weaker, they lose structural integrity, the control systems degrade without being really identified, or they just become obsolete and repairs are no longer so easy to effect. The second type of process changes, I've mentioned some of these already, but in our industry this might be due to flow changes, to pressure changes, to temperature changes and so on. But this could also include corrosion, it could include other parameters. Equipment and infrastructure changes, including structural and civil engineering. We found examples whereby, with best intent, changes to the structure of certain parts of our assets had been changed, thus weakening the structural integrity. Now, if you're familiar with the game of Jenga, the creeping change here is that removing, for example, a structural strut from one part of an asset does not cause the asset to fall down in itself, but coupled with something else which happens later on and something else which happens later on and so on and so forth, they accumulate into causing an almost unrecognizable and unmonitorable, if that's a word, change in the structural integrity until eventually we lead ourselves to a situation of catastrophe. The fourth type, management and ownership changes. Many of our assets go through change of hand, change of management, change of ownership, and those owners and managers come in with different attitudes, different experiences, different business objectives. Some businesses will prioritize availability and reliability over safety. Some businesses will characterize productivity and cash return on investment over reliability. Very difficult to characterize and very difficult to monitor. The fourth type, and one which I think we probably all are experiencing right now, is workforce changes and loss of skills. We're all experiencing an aging workforce. We're getting to a stage where many people with a huge amount of experience are leaving our industries, and frankly, in Centrica, we are not particularly great at retaining that corporate memory, and it was mentioned earlier on today, in terms of collecting that corporate memory and ensuring that people coming into the business at the beginning of their career are able to benefit from that. And finally, culture. We talked about it today with the tragic incident just now in SSE, and the change in culture whereby over a period of time, gradually, people feel inhibited to speak up, people feel inhibited to stop work safely, is cultural shifts which are quite difficult to spot. So what were the key findings of the work? So first of all, creeping change is accumulation of small changes. They tend to be gradual, they tend to be unplanned, they tend to be difficult to spot, but cumulatively, they can add up to a very significant change. They're difficult to detect, they're difficult to monitor, and traditional methodologies such as process hazard review, hazards, HAZOPs really don't do the trick. Therefore, the work developed a specific methodology which can be used alongside normal risk assessments, which we called, unsurprisingly, creeping change hazard, or CC hazard. And this specifically has developed a set of key words aimed at stimulating a discussion about creeping change in all of those dimensions that I mentioned previously. The CC hazard methodology can be applied to any asset. It is not restricted to oil and gas. And whilst admittedly the methodology was piloted on major accident hazard assets, it is very widely applicable to all assets. And I think that's a point I want to emphasize for the benefit of this meeting. It is not solely for safety risks, although that's how it was developed. It can also be applied for environmental risks and general business risks. And like all risk assessments, it has to be undertaken with the right group of people: field operators, safety professionals, engineering experts. The old saying of garbage in, garbage out applies equally to CC hazard as it does to any other risk assessment. As I mentioned, the process was piloted at 3 of our assets, and a technical report was prepared. This had been approved by the Energy Institute's Process Safety Steering Committee, and is now published by the Energy Institute as a technical document giving a full workbook of how this methodology can be applied to any industry and any asset. It's free to download for EI technical partners. I know many of you are in that categorization. And for those of you who are not, you can download it as a PDF for £50 from their website. And that concludes my presentation. I hope that was interesting for you. Thank you.